I didn't vote in 2016, and I didn't support Trump until 2018. Until that time, I hated him, and I hated him solely because the mainstream media. I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm a bit naive in some regards. My mind just has trouble comprehending things that aren't in black and white unless I'm specifically told that the gray exists. As a child, I once got a very close friend of mine beaten by her abusive parents because I confronted them about how they didn't like my best friend. I just naively thought all I needed to do was explain to them how nothing that they thought about him was true, it wasn't, and that everything would be alright. I had a very rough time looking her in the eye after I learned what I had caused, and I still regret it to this day. As I said, I am naive and I know it. So what did it take for me to realize something was wrong about the media's reporting? Just one instance. I saw a clip of Trump from one of his speeches before. I had seen it many times before, and you probably have as well. He's speaking about illegal immigrants from Mexico.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
But usually when I saw it, that's where it stopped. But this time it included this.
And some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards, and they tell us what we're getting.
Which completely changes the context of the statement. So I started looking into things a bit more, and then it occurred to me that it was 2 years into Trump's presidency and I never stopped hearing about impeachment. It was like I'd hear it and my subconscious just kept going, oh, it'll die down in a few months. Then suddenly I snapped back to the proper time and realized a few months had passed a long time ago. And that was all it took for me to start seeing all the lies and all the vitriol. Trump is by no means a perfect individual, far from it, but I could now see just how deranged the media was and how deranged they were making people about him. I'm sure you've all heard about how he mocked a reporter with, I think it was palsy, however you pronounce that. I had a friend bring it up to me. Well, it turns out he just mocked a reporter, not that he had palsy. He mocked lots of people by waving his hands around like that, including himself once, I believe.
In the word regulated, ISIS. Oh, ISIS is very tough. Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you gotta see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
Now I could claim that the media was obviously trying to deceive people, but instead I'll go with Hallam's razor, the principle that you should never attribute malice, that which can adequately be explained by stupidity. The media just didn't do their job and do a little bit of research. But because of this, we have swaths of people that think Trump is a white supremacist, regardless of how many times he denounces it. He's denounced white supremacy more than any president in recent memory, according to his press secretary at the time.
I denounce white supremacy, okay? Wait, are you listening? I denounce white supremacy.
Okay.
What's your next question? I denounce white supremacy.
Okay.
You start off with white supremacy, I denounce it.
Whether or not that's true is irrelevant, and you can find a video that strings together him denouncing it 38 times in the description below.
Are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
Are you
I'm
prepared
willing to do
specifically?
that.
It's now considered racist to want things like police or voter ID laws, and the people who believe this stuff are some of the most racist people I've ever heard. I've been called an Uncle Tom by a white man because I think police interactions with black people are a result of things outside the realm of racism. And a white man had the nerve to tell me he thinks I'm subservient to white people. You can find video of people claiming black people may not be smart enough to go to the DMV and get an ID to vote.
You think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works. For most of the communities, they don't really know what is out there just because they're not aware or they're not informed.
I also think there's a repression of black voting with how if you're a convicted felon, you're not allowed to vote and everything. And when you look at swing states like Florida, that's a huge population of the African Americans.
I highly recommend watching the rest of that particular shit show of ignorance. Link in the description. It's particularly interesting when you also know that the Gallup poll from 2016 showed that at least 77% of non-whites support voter ID laws. God forbid you try to explain that Trump supporters aren't a bunch of racists and aren't only white people. I had someone trying to tell me that just because the leader of the Proud Boys isn't white, I think he might be Afro-Latino, if that's a category, I don't know, it's so confusing nowadays. They have black members doesn't mean they aren't white supremacists. A white man basically tiptoed up to the line of calling them Uncle Toms, but the conversation stopped before he could cross it. Trump got mocked for eating a steak well done with ketchup. Excuse me, but I remember many well-done steaks served to me by my single mother alongside a bottle of ketchup, so I just find that insulting. He couldn't even have McDonald's without it being addressed. McDonald's in my house is a frickin' event, usually accompanied by a movie. So excuse me if I think the media taking shots at him for that is a low blow. Nice to see what the elites think of the rabble. And the worst part about it is, once you're aware of the stuff, you can't just become unaware of it again. I was certainly more comfortable when I thought I lived under the Cheeto dictator. But I can't just let myself stop seeking this information now. I need to know what's going on and how it could possibly affect me or my family. Even worse is that the people who apparently think I'm too dumb to get an ID also think I'm too dumb to read because they're being pretty blatant about what they're doing, or correction, what they did in the 2020 election. In Time magazine's own words, the secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election, or as they later put it, how, and I quote, a well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies working together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. Put simply, rigging an election. Just focus on the part about steering media coverage and the flow of information. If any of you are unaware of the Hunter Biden story, it's because the mainstream media and social media suppressed the story. It was claimed to be Russian disinformation because, they never got tired of that hoax. The New York Post was barred from Twitter for trying to report on it. Media Research Center determined that 36% of Biden's voters didn't know about the story, and 13% wouldn't have voted for him if they did. I don't even think it was said that they would have voted for Trump if they had known. It's just that enough people wouldn't have voted for Biden that Trump would have won, flat out. They go on to say they fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. Suddenly all those court cases getting thrown out on standing and procedural grounds makes a lot more sense, because they never looked at any of the evidence. And armies of poll workers? Anyone else remember the video of the man being thrown out even though he had all the proper paperwork to be there and observe the vote, but they just wouldn't let him back in? They even told him to call the cops on him. Or when they were putting up poster boards so that no one could see what they were doing. The game is rigged, and they aren't even trying to hide it anymore. I assume because they think that they're the good guys. But mind you, if Trump was the fascist dictator that they seem to think that he is, then, well, I imagine it would have been him doing all of this stuff, not them. The article goes on to say that they executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote count would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction. In other words, they told us the vote would take forever to finish unless they won, which we literally saw. I can't remember how many times I heard how it could take so long to count the votes and that all of them needed to be counted, but the moment that they could say Biden won, they ran with it and just stuck to it, as we were too stupid to see what was going on. I'm going to put a link to that full article in the description. I highly recommend reading it. So what do we do now? It's really hard to say. I'm really tempted just to say never vote Democrat, but that's part of the problem, really. I mean, voting against party lines. The Democrat Party relies on low information voters, people who just vote Democrat just because. I think it's LA in California where they literally, it's one of the bluest states that we have, and they literally have a poop department to clean up human feces from the city. And people are okay with that there for some reason. So while I'm okay with voting against that, I'm not okay with just voting Republican just because they're Republican. I think it's important that we all make the best efforts we can to become educated about these things, learn what positions people are running for, what their policies are going to be. I don't like the idea of just voting down ticket and not even knowing who these people are, or even knowing what position they're trying to get. I know someone who hates that Biden won, but they don't know anything about politics. They just hate Biden because the rest of us do. And that's not good. I don't want, even if I can't justify winning by that one vote if it's someone who voted just because they were told to. What is important is that people are educated about these things. But there really isn't any winning this fight at this point in time, at least in my opinion. All you can do is take care of yourself. These are the people who look down on everyone else. They have the majority of news media on their side. They're the ones who can loot and riot and burn down cities with no consequence. So all you can do is fight back on a local level, become knowledgeable in local level politics, and just peacefully protest in ways that you can. I know some businesses around here actually, they may have signs up that state you have to have a mask to come in. They don't bother enforcing it. They just have the sign up because they're told that it's required if they want to be open. We just have to keep living our lives in whatever ways we can. So that's where I'm going to end this video. I think I've said everything I want to. I just hope I've informed some of the people around my home about some of this stuff, and that you might even go and read some of those articles that I've mentioned. Please give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Comment on it if you have anything you want to say, or even if there's something you'd like to know more about. I know it's very difficult to cut through the fog of misinformation being spewed by mainstream media. For instance, how many of you probably know that Disney thanked the government of China for allowing them to film Mulan next to the concentration camps where they're rounding up Uyghur Muslims and sterilizing the women. It's a dark world we live in. So have a good day, my friends, and I'll see you next time.